Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Penpot Open Chat. I have the pleasure to have Mikolaj here. He and I we're going to discuss everything around design, code, open source, open standards, because that's what we like to chat about during our open chat sessions. So thank you very much, Mikolaj, for accepting the invite. And if you would like to introduce yourself a bit so the audience get to know you a little bit more.
Thank you for having me, Pablo. I'm Mikołaj. I'm currently based in Kraków in Poland. And just a few words of introduction. Like in my work over the past 10 years, I always mixed design with like design engineering, some sort of technical skill set. And I think I love doing that in my daily job. I also love speaking and writing about it. The collaboration we have here with Penpot, it's an awesome playground for this kind of conversations. I'm really looking forward to what we can chat about.
Yes. I think the first time we had a chat was probably a couple of years ago, and it was around how to better convey some complex ideas about the intersection between design and code. In a way that would reach a larger audience. How to do that with intent, but also with content, with quality, with I don't know. So it's what is the vocabulary to use, how to express those complex ideas. So, and that was fine. And now here we are, having super casual, informal chat. This open chat actually is so informal and symmetrical that, as people know, I get to ask you 3 questions, but you also get to ask me 3 questions, and everything is fine. Like this is an ask me anything, and I will always reply, and I will always say the truth. That's the deal, right?
Yeah. I remember when we started talking. I think it's really fantastic to see how far Penpot has developed since then. We're quite a few major releases since then, and also a few articles we worked on together.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let me start. I have my first question here, and precisely because you write a lot about designers and design and code, but you address designers, and you write a lot of amazing content. But when I would like to know what you think when you think about designers, when you say designers in one sentence in one of your articles and pieces, what is your target audience and why? Can you describe that user persona that you have amorphously, probably, in your mind, but that you have as a beacon to make sure that you're addressing specific needs and use cases?
Yeah, I think that persona was changing and broadening over the years. I remember when I started to learn web design, it feels quite a long time ago. It was quite normal to talk about people who build websites, like webmasters, as people who do both design and code. And only later we started to draw thick lines between the two. But I think that in the recent few years, I'm quite happy to see this shift, the tide turning, and starting to work a bit the other way around, with more and more job posts for design engineers and no-code designers. And I think that it's possible that in the future, this will again not be that obvious, and that it will be more and more common that UX design roles will require some, for example, coding knowledge. And I think it's like a shift that happens on many levels. Same as we look at researchers, they often also are required to do a bit more than some time ago and know more about data science, or data analysis, and product marketing. So from the perspective of that change, I think my persona is still a designer, but a designer who wants to get ready for that change and be at the forefront of it.
Can I like a kind of correlate to that? do you have, you personally, do you have like a big overlap with that user persona in terms of the evolution, but also in terms of currently the target you're addressing, or you see it like from a different perspective, like it's not me who is being targeted with my content, or is
No,
it?
I think that in most of the things I do on a daily basis, I'm exactly in the middle of that. Especially as I see that place at the table of a person like me is always much better when you have that knowledge, and it's so much easier to collaborate. And by that, I don't mean that one person should do everything.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I think that but on the other hand, like when I hear that someone says that designers should just do design and the coders should just do the code because that's like cleaner and easier, I sometimes feel like, at least in some of the contexts, they kind of miss the mark. Like I totally agree that you need multiple people, and you need multiple people to discuss and challenge each other's ideas, or to review each other's design and code. And then this kind of tension is very beneficial. But if there is a skill overlap between those people,
yeah,
that's only added value.
yeah. Totally agree with that. All right, it's your turn, Mikowai. So, what do you find in store?
Yeah, so the first question I wanted to ask you is about Penpot's narrative. That I think today is there's a lot about design and code, and bridging the gap between them. But
Yeah,
still, I feel like we are talking here about two kind of separate worlds. Um,
mm.
and I think this very well reflects like the business reality of today. But I was curious, do you think that it's possible that in the future design and code will not only have the one-to-one relationship, but also more become one, and how that would influence Penpot as a product?
Well, well, that is quite near to some concepts these days that we're exploring, like the industry as a whole, like no code, low code tools, and we are not that excited about that yet. And the reason, and then I'll answer like the broader question. The reason that we're not so excited about low code, no code tools is that they typically tend to commoditize either code or design.
Mhm.
And so that is, in this case, low code, no code tool commoditizes code, of course. And there are tools that are already building that on top of Penpot. It's interesting. Like we are getting Penpot forks that are creating website builders, which you would recognize as low code tool, right? So we are happy that that is happening, but for
Mhm.
Penpot, it's still very important to um, have equally valued design and code. At the same time, you're right. We want to bridge the gap. So if we want to bridge the gap, what does it mean in terms of what is the overlap here that emerges? And is it design equals code, design to code 101? And what about the roles, the people, also? Like, is there anything like full stack design code, something like that, or? And we're not sure about that. But what we really want to make sure is that the way both designers and developers approach a tool like Penpot remains almost indistinguishable. And actually, our metrics, internal metrics, and I think I shared this roughly during our 2.0 live stream some time ago,
Mhm.
that we ask people to say through the onboarding survey whether they are a designer or a developer or something else, because we are still applying the existing labels, the existing
Yeah.
buckets. And people don't have an issue self-labeling and self-identifying themselves as either designers or developers. There are some people that say, that is not me, and that's fine. But the vast majority are still happy to go with, I do design, I do code. Now, what happens inside Penpot is what is intriguing and is exciting to us, because it's very difficult for us, almost now impossible, based only on behavior analytics. So basically, anonymous metrics about how people are using the tool, like they're using this feature or they're using that other feature. If we compare how people are using Penpot, the intensity of the use also, and what they said upfront, like they are designer or developers, is impossible to tell them apart. And that was unexpected, or it was unexpected to happen so soon, that you would originally have guessed that this user definitely has to be a designer, because the way they're using a design tool is like very professional, very systematic, very nuanced, and yet they are a developer. They are developers. So we are in this transition, I think, where we're still using the kind of the old regime labeling system and the buckets and the two worlds, two different species, and building a tool that bridges the gap.
Yeah.
And we really hope that Penpot in a year's time or 2 years' time, something like that, not a decade, definitely not a decade, will help accelerate that overlapping idea where people start looking at designers like with a more engineer mindset, perhaps, or code ready mindset. Like I think you said design, like UX engineering or design engineering or something like that. But also developers that have an appetite for good design are also into the design process and design systems, and and being part of that conversation. So I think it is problematic for us because it's a challenge. You have to address the audience as they perceive themselves today, and at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, you're trying to change that. You're
Yeah,
trying,
yeah, I see how this can be a bit problematic, but I think you're having this spot on. Maybe I'm a bit biased here, but I think the approach you're describing sounds so much more like forward-looking and maintainable in the long run than creating very separate spaces for designers and developers within the design tool.
yeah. And I think, and I'll just finish this so that we have time for the other questions. But I think one of the key ingredients to achieve that as a design prototyping tool that is open source, open standards, is to make sure that we bring developers into the tool as power users, because then they are now part of the conversation, a broader conversation about the design process and design. And I think that is, if a design tool is just inviting developers to casually come, take what they need, some code, and then kind of escape from the design tool, like this is not my place, this is not part of my tool
Yeah.
chain, then that transition is going to take longer. But if we help that happen like super soon, and Penpot does show that that is possible, then I think that transition, that hybrid, that overlapping thing going on will evolve much rapidly. But yeah, it's one of those ironies of what we build. That is, you're building for the existing, the present, but you are kind of trying to enforce the future, your vision now, and you have to make some compromises. Even in the narrative, we need to make some compromises. So yeah. So thank you for that question. Not an easy one, but I hope I answered it honestly. All right. So now
Yeah,
it's my
that's
turn.
good.
Now it's my turn
Yes.
to come back. So I had yeah, I really love when people like you advocate for tool agnostic materials and content and everything, right? Particularly around design. I think that's very important to be like tool agnostic. Like, I'm going to tell you something that it's about skills, it's about knowledge, it's about career, but it's not about a specific tool. And I think everyone would agree that as a principle. Yeah, that's how things should be done. And from academia to professional career advancement, everyone agrees. And then that doesn't happen. Like, people start expressing their value, how good as a professional they are, through the tools they are using and through their expertise in particular tools. And you have this progress bar on different tools, on resumes and CVs, like, hey, I have like Adobe XD like 7 out of 10 and things like that, like very specific. Like, if you want me, I am productive because I know these tools, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it takes so much space, like it becomes like
Hmm.
prominently. And I'm not even going through 4 years of experience in blah blah blah, when perhaps the tool doesn't even have 4 years, hasn't
Hmm.
been 4 years in out there, right? So what do you think, are still the most important skills the people need to be really honestly tool agnostic as
Hmm.
designers? What you would like to stress there around that?
I think that learning those tools and mastering them is still important. However, like when I advocate for being tool agnostic, I don't mean that you shouldn't care about design tools. It's more that being good at them is not necessarily what people think. And
Yeah,
well, maybe put it this way: like the design tools are a bit like driving a car. Like once you've learned driving one of them and you're good at it, you probably also will manage the others. Of course, sometimes you will find a bit bigger car or like a different manufacturer, but you will quickly adjust. If you excel in a single one and you like understand the basics, you're gonna manage, right? Um, and I think that's one angle to it. And the other one is just not to obsess over the features, more like how you use them. I think what's
yeah,
like really important is like, let's say when you work in a large organization and you need things to be well organized and maintainable and scalable. That's what you should focus on systemic thinking, on regularity, predictability. And no matter if the app has some fancy features. It's really about how you work with them, not which features you use. Um, and on the other hand, I think that we can observe like at least to some extent, like the importance of the UI craft to a bit decrease over time in the past few years, like fueled probably mostly by design systems and like the industry-wide standardization. So I think that ironically, as our tools get more and more complex and powerful, creating quality UIs is actually getting easier. Um, it's another discussion, like what are the trade-offs and everything starts to look the same, but
yeah,
objectively it is getting easier. And to some extent it's a good thing because this leaves more space for designers to learn new things, like for example, Flexbox and Grid. So, like you have a limited time, right? So you can as well just start learning other things. Um, but yeah, I think those things got hand in hand. Like if you want to get really good, you still should excel in using design tools. But if you excel in one, you will get by.
yeah. Actually, when you mentioned Flexbox and Grid from CSS, and Penpot is notoriously known for adopting those. When we were discussing um, with people perhaps not knowledgeable in the matter, but what is the feature? Why is that feature so important? And I would always say the feature is important. I'm not saying it's not super cool to have CSS Grid like native there, but it really is about the vocabulary that we bring into the tool, which
Yeah.
comes from an open standard and comes from its own angle of what you should be learning, and what is how much this is really worth your time. And I think it's like 100% overlaps with whatever future path you want to take, future path. So it then translates into a feature. It has to be actionable, but it was more about in this case, bringing a vocabulary, a terminology, a way of understanding alignment and layouts. The feature comes next or comes last, right?
Yeah.
And we will of course promote CSS Grid as being super amazing, innovative stuff, but it's really what is behind the hood, that is under the hood, what is really exciting for us. Okay, your turn, Mikolaj. Any other questions you wanted to ask to me, or
Yeah.
me being on behalf of the Penpot team?
Yeah, I wanted to continue on the topic I started with my first question, and this time ask you about Penpot's personas and how they might develop in the next few years. I feel like what we see in the industry is very interesting, where we start like inviting more and more people to the process, and try to be tools for everyone, for designers, for researchers, for developers, for managers, stakeholders. Like everyone should be involved. I'm curious, like, how is Penpot thinking about it?
So this is kind of opinionated political answer, in the sense that we mm, we want we want to have it all, but it's true that we have priorities here for that user persona. So first, we want to help build new user personas that come from existing user personas, designer and developer, and what is like a new type of breed, right? Because we think that bridging the gap really is the kind of the antechamber to new roles. So we are trying to focus on that. Like it is a very tense space. Like when two worlds collide, well, we think something can be created out of that, like kind of a universe, something like that. So we hope to see new user personas. And in a way that the industry is already trying to find new job titles and things around that. The same time that the same way back in the day you would have backend developers and then front-end developers and then full stack developers, right? Or the world of DevOps and backend, and people that understand like the two originating worlds. So I'm saying this because it is true that we need to have everyone as part of the conversation. As I said, the design process, like marketeers, product managers, content creators, everyone there. And I think there is a race in many of the tools to expand as much as they can, to take over all these other pockets of user personas and have them, because then you get a bigger addressable market, right? If you really can access all this potential in terms of users. But I think we will always focus on existing user personas or new emerging user personas that add value to the design process and whoever is in charge of designing. I think that is what is critical to us. We don't want to commoditize design. We don't want to make everything easier. Like, I mean, yes, in many ways, but as going back to what you said, but then a lot of things are easier, then you can do more, right? You have time to be creative and differentiate yourself in many ways. So we will focus on all user personas, but not with the same intensity. We will really go towards new emerging user personas around that intersection, and the user personas that are not a part of that intersection and yet drive power, decision power, to the design process and whoever is designing. That's what I can say. Like, this is why I'm saying it's like strong opinions, quite political, because we really want to make sure that we don't have like just everyone on board equally important. You know, producing. I mean, it's very natural to say everyone deserves to share their opinions and craft everything together, and the workflows of the software building are very complex and end to end, and everyone's invited. I get that. That's very easy to say, but at the end of the day, I think you have to concentrate your efforts in specific user personas, and then make sure that everyone feels welcome and can participate, but towards the goal of good design.
Absolutely.
Now, if we are successful in making sure that design equals code and code equals design, then automatically that implies so much more. Through design, we also get code, and that is, well, that's very ambitious. But yeah, so you won't see Penpot in the short term addressing like very peripheral roles that casually come and go around the design process. I think that makes total sense to a market and business. But when you're building a tool, I think it's important to focus and prioritize what is dear to you, what matters to you.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like when everything is important, nothing is, right?
Yeah, but we are seeing trends out there where, okay, we need everyone here. I mean, and we love product managers, we love marketeers, we love people from comms and marketing. Really, they need to have an open source, open standards tool. But when you have to optimize particular use cases and workflows, you have to also understand that, okay, this is a productivity tool that needs to address this very, very obviously, like driven. All right. Not easy questions, Miko, why? But I like them. This is that's the game. That's the name of the game. All right. So let me ask my third and last question to you. Um, so CSS. So a lot about CSS, and we see CSS here at Penpot with a lot of, I mean, respect and potential. And CSS today is not what used to be. So also happy to see that evolution. I was one of those webmasters that you were referring to earlier. Like, yes, my first website was in 1995, I think. That was my first website, and it did not have CSS. Of course, it did not. So happy to see that evolution. So what do you see is the biggest strengths in CSS, particularly for designers moving forward? And how do you think, do you have any expectation of what CSS can still become within, let's say, within the next few years, that also helps designers bring all that innovation and open standards to their work? So, biggest strength of CSS for designers, and if the feature of CSS is allows you to be, as a designer, to be real optimistic at what you're going to get from that. What is your opinion on that?
I'm very excited to see CSS evolve. And I think the only thing I'm kind of sure about is that it's not going anywhere. Like,
Oh yeah.
it's like web standards, if anything, they are just strengthening over the past couple of years. They're taking over applications, desktop, mobile in a lot of areas. So I think we're kind of stuck with CSS, and that's good. Like especially for designers, I think the CSS is a powerful tool. And if anything more than the others, I'm kind of sad to like often see CSS like the opportunities of it to stay untapped when we just treat
Hmm.
it as an afterthought, as a language we translate design into,
Yeah.
especially when the medium of the design files does not match well the world of CSS. And maybe, it's also good to think the other way around, that it's not the design mockup that is our source of truth, our final medium, and then we translate it to CSS because we have to. Well, this is how world browsers work, so just homework to be done, but treat the CSS as the actual medium that you work with and try to understand the ins and outs. And then the mockup starts to be like a tool together, or ideally the same thing. And yeah, like same as we spoke a moment ago about flex and grid. I think this
Yeah.
is why this is such an important change and the right direction. Um, but still, what I think is important to keep in mind is even though CSS is a fantastic tool for designers, it doesn't mean it works equally well at all stages of the work. It can be
Yeah.
cumbersome. It can be slow to work with. It has certain limitations. And especially at the beginning of the work, I would always advise to have limitations at the back of your head, help the limitations fuel your creativity, but not clinch to those
Yeah.
constraints from the very beginning. Like I know some people who designing code. I think it's pretty hard. Like my mindset is more in the area of like free, unlimited sketching.
Mm.
Like sketching in the understanding of Bill Paxton in like his book of sketching user interfaces, not like literally as sketching on paper. And it's I think it's good to like start freely, but then confronted with the medium with the media you're aiming for. But to do that, you have to know it. You need to know like what does it offer, both constraints and the power features.
Yeah, I think when we decided to go with CSS as, in a way, like a foundational design language for Penpot, of course, the basic idea there was, well, then by definition, whatever you're designing is valid code. Like this comes from a specific set of properties around alignment and layouts, and flows and etc. So you're safe. Like you cannot not design something that is already valid code. So, but I think that the CSS could prove useful as a declarative design language. Like it's not, it is one of those. It is a declarative language. It's about the end result and not how to actually you arrive to that result. And in that sense, it is relatively media free, media independent. So you could design without, like, I'm knowing this is not going to be on the web. It's not going to be on a device that typically reacts like a web. It could be an app, whatever. And still, CSS gives me the vocabulary and the tools to design something very cool. And I could design in CSS, perhaps using Penpot because it's like visually very super easy. I don't know, a book cover, right?
Yeah.
Or like I do a ton of, a lot these days, slides, presentations. And
Yeah.
I use CSS, I use Penpot and through Flex Layout and Grid Layout to create in no time amazing presentations, and they could just end up being a PDF, right?
Yeah.
So there's no, that someone could say, why are you using CSS for a medium that is not supporting CSS? Well, because CSS is a bit agnostic also about the medium. Perhaps it is because of the nature of the web, which is very fluid, it's unpredictable, it's it evolves. You cannot control it, and that is a good foundation for a declarative language, design language. So I think the fact that CSS has to conform to this chaotic world of the web and whatever gets inspiration from the web allows CSS to transcend the web and be by itself
Yeah.
something useful around. Now, having said that, of course, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't go and sketch using CSS, or I would not um, very soon start with those constraints. because when you are designing, because that is not, I don't think that's the point, you know. But I have in high regard CSS, because yeah, it was meant for the web, but I think it has gone beyond that a bit, and I think that's a good thing. I'm waiting for some design, the cloud design language that actually is superior to CSS, and I can't think of anyone right now. So not ideal, but better than expected. All right. Well, sorry, I did. It's really, this is so exciting. So I really like this conversation. And we have one. You have one more question for me.
Yeah, I
So
think that's actually a good segue to my last question I was supposed to ask. Because I want to ask you about another standard that Penpot uses, and
yeah,
this is SVG.
right.
I remember when I was first discovering Penpot, I was like, okay, open standards, how does it work? I was trying to dig in, like see what's under the hood. I was like, is it like some JSON translated to HTML? Will it be, just divs all the way down? I was like, oh, SVG, interesting
SVG.
choice. So I wanted to ask you about, can you just say a couple of words about the history behind it, and maybe what limitations and opportunities come from working with SVG as the main
Yeah,
medium within the tool.
yeah. No, great question. When we decided to build Penpot a few years ago, we wanted to make sure that we were designing or building a design and prototyping tool that was both for designers and developers, because we felt as designers and developers that we needed a tool to bring us together instead of keep us in those silos. Since we were open source designers and developers, we said, well, it has to be open source. And since some of us, many of us, I mean, myself included, we've been in open source, open content for more than 25 years. We also said, look, and open standards is important. So to achieve almost zero vendor lock-in, it's important for a tool that allows you to create content, for that content to be like independent of the tool. So at the time we said, well, that's a very obvious answer. We got SVG, and we are going to build a web-based tool. So browsers render SVG, so we can rely on them and leverage tons of features and development that goes into browsers that we cannot. It's too expensive for us to build a browser, so let's them do the heavy lifting in some ways, so we can accelerate our development pace, which is very important. And this is all about open standards and open source. Is also about making sure that you can be super quick in building something on top of giant shoulders. So you're building on top of whoever or whatever came before you, and then you share your delta, your diff, and others build on top of that. Like I was mentioning, forks, Penpot forks that are already creating website builders like low code, and then they take Penpot and it's like, okay, you gave me 95% of the way already. I just need to develop 5%. So that 95% in a way was browsers and SVG. So in that sense, massive advantage, by hands down, that allowed us to even conceive this was possible. But SVG has its own limitations. It is not necessarily the language where in which you express a UI. It is an imperative design language, so it's not a declarative design language. It's more like this. That's very precisely saying the format is about very mathematically precisely saying this, and this goes here, this goes there. There are some interpretations that might change depending on your viewer. Like we were doing some tests for a print for a T-shirt, and we saw the art test, and some strokes were thicker than they should. So
Yeah.
definitely the T-shirt company was using a viewer of the SVG that treated that differently, the stroke. So we converted that into paths, and that's fine. But you see, it's like it's a pity. So tremendous advantage of making sure that everyone can take their work on Penpot elsewhere, but at the same time, it has some limitations because it was not meant to create user interfaces that are live and that are fluid and that they can react to different media, etc. That is why we're combining that with CSS. And also, open standards need to be implemented, and SVG 2.0 is not that implemented in some browsers, and there are parts of the standard that are not currently being implemented, and we cannot just go and write that for Chrome, Firefox, and the rest ourselves, right? So I think moving forward, we will make sure that whatever you design is you get that in SVG. But also with the recent development around HTML and CSS, we will basically have more options and try to find a way where, as a design and prototyping tool, we are informed by SVG the same way we're informed by CSS and HTML, but we have our own way to innovate in terms of what language or what vocabulary is needed for a design prototyping tool to make sure that you have full creativity, no limits. And you will have your own constraints because that's what this is all about, but not because of the tool. So again, this is hard for us. The compromise is there too. The SVG and the rendering and how browsers treat SVG helped us get to this point. But now we're seeing that we might have a glass ceiling in terms of performance, but also in terms of how we express design in a tool. And so we are looking at the bigger picture and making decisions that still honor open standards, but are not necessarily tied to how those standards think about UI, if that makes sense.
Mm,
Okay.
yeah,
Um,
excited to see that.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, no more questions, Mikolaj. No more questions. That's it. You exhausted,
Okay, we're done.
exhausted your quota. No, but that was good. I think I enjoyed this a lot. This was very, very informative for me. And getting to know you better. Really a fan of your work and how you approach when you create your content. I think you're helping designers a lot, and we are happy to see that how designers understand the value of Penpot, and also developers, comes from good content from people that are smart, but also smart in how they approach how to teach people, how to show people why something is important, and do that in a way that is meaningful and approachable and accessible. So I think that really, really glad that you have that talent and that you accepted the invitation to be here. So that's it for today. Thank you very much, Mikolaj. See you soon somewhere. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all the Penpot stories. It was really amazing to learn more about it.
You're welcome.